But even as he worked to escape, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, what if she was right? What if the Xelarian Empire was where he truly belonged? Ryland's plan had been working, at least for the moment. He had been playing the part of the obedient servant, following Veyara's every command, learning her ways. But deep down, every day felt like a struggle, a tug-of-war between his desire for freedom and the growing pull of her world. He didn't trust Veyara, not fully, but there were moments when he couldn't ignore the strange bond that seemed to be forming between them. Was it just his imagination, or was she starting to view him differently? Every conversation with her seemed like another step in his dangerous game. He had learned much about her goals and the Xelarian Empire, but every new piece of information only made the situation more complicated. The Empire was vast, its influence stretching far beyond what he could have imagined. Yet even with all that power, there were cracks. Veyara's vision for the future was clear. She wanted control, but she also wanted to reshape her people, bring about a new era. It was a noble cause in her mind, but for Ryland, it was a prison. He didn't belong here, and he wasn't about to let her drag him into a life he didn't choose. One evening, as Ryland sat alone in his room, his mind racing with thoughts of escape, a quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. At first, he froze. Was it a guard? A servant? Or perhaps it was Veyara herself. He stood up cautiously and opened the door. To his surprise, it wasn't Veyara standing there. Instead, it was a member of the royal guard, a tall figure with a helmet that covered their face. "You are needed," the guard said, their voice emotionless. Ryland's heart skipped a beat. "By whom?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The guard's head tilted slightly, and they stepped aside, motioning for him to follow. "The princess," the guard replied, their tone not leaving room for argument. With a mixture of confusion and dread, Ryland followed the guard through the winding corridors of the palace. His mind raced. Why was Veyara summoning him now? What did she want from him this time? His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of his decisions bearing down on him. Was this his chance to escape? Or was this just another one of her games? As they reached the throne room, the doors swung open, and Ryland stepped inside. The room was grand, its high ceilings and intricate designs making it feel like a place of both power and isolation. Veyara was standing at the center, her golden eyes fixed on a large holographic map of the Empire. When she noticed Ryland enter, she turned to face him. "Ryland," she said, her voice cool and calm, as though nothing had changed. "I've been waiting for you." He didn't respond right away, his eyes scanning the room, trying to make sense of the situation. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice quiet, but firm. Veyara motioned for him to come closer. "I've been watching you, Ryland," she said, her voice steady, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. "You've been playing the part well, but I'm afraid it's time for you to make a choice." Ryland's stomach tightened. "A choice?" he asked, unsure of what she meant. "Yes," Veyara replied, taking a step toward him. "A choice that will decide your fate and the future of this empire." Ryland took a deep breath. He had been preparing for this moment, though he hadn't known it would come so soon. The moment when he would have to decide. Would he continue to play along with her plan, or would he fight for his freedom? The weight of the decision hung in the air, and for the first time, Ryland realized just how much was at stake. Not just for him, but for everyone. "I don't want to be a part of your empire," Ryland said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I don't belong here." Veyara's expression softened for just a moment, and for a brief second, Ryland saw something in her eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't anger or manipulation, but something closer to sadness. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the cold determination he had come to expect from her. "You don't have a choice, Ryland," she said, her voice firm. "This empire needs change, and you're the one who can help bring it. I've chosen you because I believe in you. You have the strength to help me, to help us." Ryland shook his head. frustration bubbling up inside him. You don't get it. I don't want to help you. I don't care about your empire, your plans. All I want is to go home. Vayara stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. You're not going home, Rylan. You've been brought here for a reason, and it's not something you can escape. Vayara's gaze softened, but there was no warmth in it. It was as though she were studying him, trying to understand him. You don't understand, do you, human? She asked, her voice low and almost thoughtful. You belong to me now. There is no escaping that. I'll never belong to you. Rylan shot back, his voice filled with defiance. She took a step closer to him, her presence overwhelming. You will learn in time that there are things far bigger than your petty human defiance. Things that will make you understand why this is your destiny. Rylan backed away, his heart pounding. He didn't want to listen to her. He didn't care about her destiny or her empire. All he cared about was getting out of here. But the truth was, he had no idea how to do that. The palace was like a maze, and every guard, every servant, every piece of technology seemed designed to keep him contained. I'm not afraid of you, he said, trying to sound confident. Vayara tilted her head, studying him like an interesting specimen. You should be, she replied quietly. Fear is a powerful thing. It can either break you, or it can make you stronger. Which will it be, human? Rylan didn't respond. He just turned away, his mind whirling. There had to be a way out. There had to be a chance to escape. But for now, he was stuck in a cage of his own making, and Vayara was the one holding the key. The next few days were filled with more training, more learning, and more silence between him and Vayara. She no longer pushed him as hard as she had at first, but instead, her lessons became more subtle. She would watch him from a distance, her eyes never leaving him, always analyzing his movements. It was as though she were preparing him for something, though Rylan couldn't quite figure out what. One afternoon, as they were walking through the palace gardens after another exhausting session, Vayara suddenly spoke. Why do you fight this so much? She asked, her voice carrying a strange calmness. Why resist what is meant to be? Rylan stopped in his tracks, his brow furrowed. What do you mean, meant to be? She turned to face him, her eyes glowing with intensity. You are part of something much bigger than yourself. You are here for a reason, Rylan. I have chosen you. Chosen me, he repeated, his voice bitter. You've trapped me here. No, she said softly, almost with a hint of sadness. I have given you a chance to become more than just a prisoner, to be my partner, to rule by my side. Rylan was stunned into silence. The idea that she was offering him power, that she wanted him to rule with her, was both incomprehensible and dangerous. He couldn't imagine accepting any offer from her, not after everything that had happened. I'll never rule with you, he said firmly, his voice shaking with anger. I don't want anything to do with your empire. Vayara sighed, a soft, almost resigned sound. You will, in time, she said quietly. I don't need your consent to make you part of this. The Exilarian Empire will become your home, whether you like it or not. Rylan felt a chill at her words. He could feel the weight of her promise settling over him. He didn't want to believe it, but deep down, he knew she wasn't lying. He was caught, and the longer he stayed, the more the Empire's grip on him would tighten. As the days turned into weeks, Rylan's situation seemed to grow more complicated. He found himself spending more time with Vayara, learning the ways of the Exilarian Empire. And yet something about her began to change in his eyes. There were moments when he saw a flicker of something softer, more vulnerable, beneath her cold exterior. There were nights when they would sit together in silence, and Rylan would catch her looking at him in a way he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't hatred. It was something else, something more complicated. At the same time, Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something he didn't fully understand. Vayara had always said that he was part of something bigger, but what did that mean? Was it possible that he was being groomed for a role he hadn't yet figured out? But with every passing day, the tension between them grew. He couldn't deny that there was a strange attraction between them, something that made his heart beat faster, despite himself. But at the same time, he knew it would never work. He was human, and she was Silurian. There was no future in this. The Queen's golden eyes never left him. You will live with her from now on. She has taken an interest in you. Ryland's chest tightened. I'm not interested in whatever you're offering. Viara, the princess, took a step forward. Her presence was magnetic, as if she commanded the very air around her. She stared at Ryland with an intensity that made him feel small. You don't have a choice, human, she said, her voice soft but full of power. You belong to me now. Ryland's mind reeled. He was a prisoner, that much was clear, but now the situation had taken an even stranger turn. He had been taken from his ship, thrown into the heart of an alien empire, and now he was being told that he would live with a princess and be at her beck and call. I won't be your prisoner, Ryland said firmly, trying to hide the unease building inside him. I have my own life. I don't belong to anyone. Viara smiled, though there was no kindness in it. You will learn quickly that you are not free to choose. You are mine now, and soon you will marry me. Ryland froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marry her? The thought was absurd. He didn't even know her, didn't want to know her. He was an explorer, a free man. This wasn't his life. Before he could respond, the Queen raised her hand, and a strange energy filled the room. Ryland felt his body grow heavy, as if invisible chains were wrapping around him, pulling him toward the princess. This is your fate now, Queen Sci-Fi said, her voice unwavering. You may resist, but it is of no use. You will live here with my daughter and learn your place in our empire. Ryland's breath quickened as he tried to resist the force pulling him toward the princess, but there was no escaping it. In a few steps, he found himself standing in front of her. She was taller than he expected, and the intensity of her gaze sent a shiver down his spine. Viara tilted her head, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. You will learn to obey, human, and in time, you will understand why this is the way it must be. Ryland opened his mouth to protest, but his words caught in his throat. What could he say? He was trapped in a place he didn't understand, surrounded by beings far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. The princess stepped closer, her violet markings glowing brighter as she reached out to touch his arm. A strange warmth spread through his skin where her fingers brushed against him. For now you will stay with me, she said, her voice low and alluring. You will learn what it means to be mine. Ryland's mind was in chaos, but he knew one thing for sure. His life had just changed forever, and whatever happened next, he wasn't going to be the same person he was before. As they led him away to a new life on a strange planet, one thing became clear to him. This wasn't the peaceful exploration he had signed up for. This was a whole new world, a world where he was no longer the one in control. The journey ahead promised to be filled with danger, mystery, and perhaps something even more unexpected, a bond he couldn't yet understand. Ryland was led through the grand alien palace, his mind reeling with the impossibility of the situation. Everywhere he looked, strange and terrifyingly beautiful creatures moved around him. Warriors with glowing armor, diplomats with elegant attire, and scientists whose skin shifted in strange patterns as they spoke in low voices. He felt small, out of place, as though he didn't belong here at all. Viara walked beside him, her presence almost suffocating. Her violet markings seemed to glow brighter the more he resisted. She didn't say anything, but her silence was just as powerful as any command. Every so often, her golden eyes would glance toward him, as if measuring his every move. The palace itself was a wonder. The walls were made of a smooth metallic substance that reflected light like liquid. Strange symbols, constantly shifting, moved across the surfaces, glowing softly. It felt like the palace was alive, watching him. The air smelled faintly of incense, something he couldn't quite place. He had no idea where he was being taken, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to know. His instincts told him to resist, to fight his way out. But as they moved deeper into the palace, surrounded by imposing warriors and alien eyes watching him, he realized just how powerless he was. At night, when they were not training, Ryland would sit alone in his room, thinking about his old life, about Earth, about his crew, about the mission he had started. He wondered if they were still out there, if they were searching for him. But deep down, he knew there was no way they could find him. He was lost in a far-off corner of the galaxy, a prisoner of an empire he didn't understand. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, Vayara would sit with him, and they would talk. Though their conversations were always tense, she would ask him about Earth, about human culture, and he would tell her what he could. There was something almost human about her during those moments, something that made Ryland see her not just as a royal figure, but as a person. It was confusing. His thoughts were a mix of resentment, curiosity, and something else, something he didn't want to acknowledge. The more he trained, the more he understood her world, the more he found himself drawn to her. But that didn't mean he would ever accept what was happening. He would never accept being married to her. He had to find a way out. But as the days passed, it seemed less and less likely that escape was possible. Still, Ryland held on to hope. He had survived worse situations before. He wasn't ready to give up. And so, his strange life continued, living in the alien palace, training with Vayara, surviving. But the question remained, was there a way out? Or was he truly trapped in this world forever? The days were starting to blur together for Ryland. He woke up, trained, ate strange food, and slept, only to repeat the cycle again. The endless routine felt like it was driving him to the edge. He had been trapped in this alien world for far too long, and the weight of his situation was starting to take its toll on him. But through it all, there was one constant: Vayara. She had become more than just his captor. Every day, their interactions became more complicated. There was no denying that she was powerful, intelligent, and beautiful in a way that felt almost inhuman. But despite her cold demeanor, there were moments, brief, fleeting, that hinted at something else. A curiosity in her eyes when she watched him, a softening in her voice when she spoke of her people. Yet there was no mistaking the fact that she controlled everything. She controlled his training, his life, and even his thoughts. No matter how many times he tried to break free, she always seemed to be one step ahead, anticipating his moves before he even made them. It was as though she could read his mind, and that only made his situation more unbearable. One evening, after another grueling training session, Ryland sat in his room, drenched in sweat and exhausted. He had spent the entire day learning hand-to-hand combat techniques, most of which involved using his environment as a weapon. Vayara had taught him to be quick, to be smart, and to never underestimate his opponent. But what she didn't teach him was how to escape. As he leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath, his mind wandered back to Earth. He missed it, the feel of the air, the sound of birds, the sense of freedom. He missed the quiet moments when everything felt normal. But most of all, he missed his crew. They had to be out there somewhere, searching for him. They had to be. They would never leave him behind. But as much as he hoped for rescue, he knew it was a foolish dream. He was stuck here, in the middle of an alien empire, far from home, and with no way to contact anyone. The Exilarian Empire was vast, and their technology was far beyond anything humanity had. Even if they could track him down, it seemed unlikely that anyone could reach him in time. A knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. "Come in," he called, though he didn't feel like entertaining anyone right now. The door opened, and Vayara stepped inside. She was wearing a long, flowing robe that shimmered in the dim light of the room. Her golden eyes locked onto him immediately, and for a moment, he felt a chill run down his spine. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, observing him. "Are you always this exhausted after training?" she asked, her voice smooth and calm, like a river flowing over rocks. Ryland didn't answer. Instead, he focused on the floor, trying to ignore the discomfort that was building in his chest. He wasn't in the mood for small talk, especially not with her. "You're improving," she said, almost as if reading his mind. "You're stronger than you were when you arrived here." He looked up at her, his eyes hard. "That's not the point. The point is that I'm not staying here. I don't belong here. And I'm not marrying you." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't move. "I never said you had a choice in the matter." Ryland stood up abruptly, the anger boiling inside him. "I will find a way out of here. You can't keep me here forever." Commander Ryland sat in the command chair of the Sentinel, his fingers lightly tapping against the console. The stars outside the ship shimmered in the vastness of space, an endless sea of lights. The crew was quiet, everyone going about their duties, accustomed to the peaceful monotony of space exploration. It had been weeks since they had left Earth on their mission to chart unvisited regions of the galaxy. The mission had been uneventful, with no signs of danger, just the beauty of the unknown stretching out before them. But that calm was about to shatter in an instant. "Commander, we're picking up something." Lieutenant Alara's voice cut through the silence. She was the ship's navigator, and her tone was tense. Ryland turned toward the screen, his brow furrowing. The display showed a large, unidentified object appearing out of nowhere, almost like it had materialized from thin air. It was massive, far bigger than anything they had ever encountered. "What is that?" Ryland asked, his voice steady, but his mind racing. Alara didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning the data. "I'm not sure, Commander. It's not matching any known ship readings. It's unlike anything we've seen before." Before Ryland could give an order, the object in front of them flickered, and suddenly, their ship was caught in a bright, shimmering energy field. The lights on the Sentinel blinked and dimmed, and the sound of alarms rang throughout the ship. "Full power to shields," Ryland barked. "Prepare for a fight." But no one was prepared for what happened next. Without warning, the energy field surrounding the ship pulsed, and a voice boomed across the ship's communication system. It was deep, commanding, and it chilled Ryland to the core. "Surrender peacefully. Your life depends on it." The crew exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. Ryland's hands clenched into fists. His instincts told him to fight, but something in the voice made him hesitate. "Who are you?" Ryland demanded, trying to sound calm. "What do you want?" There was a brief pause before the voice responded again, this time more clearly. "I am Queen Sci-Fi of the Xelarian Empire. You have trespassed into our territory. Surrender immediately, and your life will be spared." Ryland's mind raced. The Xelarians? He'd heard rumors about them. Powerful, reclusive, and dangerous. No one had ever returned from an encounter with them. "We didn't mean any harm," Ryland replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We were just passing through." "Enough." The Queen's voice interrupted him sharply. "You will be taken into custody. Do not resist, human. You will come with us now." Before Ryland could respond, everything around him changed. The control panel in front of him flickered, and in an instant, the entire crew was gone. He found himself standing in the middle of an enormous, unfamiliar throne room. The walls around him were made of dark, metallic material, glowing faintly with strange symbols. The air was thick with an eerie energy, and towering alien warriors stood at attention, their eyes glowing a bright amber. At the far end of the room sat a figure, regal and imposing. She was a woman, but unlike any human woman he had ever seen. Her skin was dark as obsidian, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Her eyes were the color of molten gold, intense and full of power. She looked down at him with a calm, measured gaze. "I am Queen Sci-Fi," she said, her voice echoing in the vast room. "And you, human, are now my prisoner." Ryland straightened, refusing to show fear. "I'm not a prisoner," he snapped. I demand to speak with whoever is in charge here. The queen's lips curved into a slight smile, though there was no warmth in it. You will speak to me. You are in my domain now. I decide your fate. Ryland's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced with thoughts of escape, but he knew it was futile. There was no way out of this. He was at the mercy of this alien queen and her empire. As he stood there, trying to assess his options, a figure appeared beside the queen. She was a young woman, standing with grace and confidence. Her beauty was striking, almost unreal, with violet markings running along her arms that seemed to glow softly. Her eyes, too, were the same molten gold as the queen's, though there was something more curious in her gaze. "This is my daughter, Princess Vayara," the queen said, her tone still cold. "She will be your new companion." Ryland blinked, confused. "Companion? What do you mean?" They reached a large door at the end of the hallway. Vayara placed her hand on a smooth, glowing surface, and the door slid open silently. The room beyond was luxurious, far more than anything Ryland had ever imagined. Large, flowing curtains hung from the walls, shimmering with an iridescent glow. The floor was made of a dark stone, smooth and cold beneath his feet. In the center of the room was a massive bed with silken sheets, and nearby, a strange chair-like structure that Ryland couldn't quite place. "This will be your room," Vayara said, her voice soft, almost too soft. "You will stay here for now." Ryland glanced around, trying to make sense of it all. "This isn't happening," he muttered under his breath. "This isn't my life." Vayara's gaze snapped to him, her eyes narrowing. "You will adjust, human. You have no choice." He didn't reply. What could he say? There was no fighting back. He wasn't on Earth anymore. He wasn't even in a human ship. He was on an alien world, surrounded by beings who controlled everything. He was at their mercy. Ryland sank onto the edge of the bed, his mind racing. He tried to figure out a way to escape, a plan, anything. But as the hours passed, his thoughts only grew more tangled. He had no idea how to leave, or even if there was a way out. Vayara left him alone in the room, though not for long. Soon, a strange servant, humanoid but with skin that shifted colors like liquid, entered the room. It bowed to him in a respectful manner. "You will be fed," it said in a soft, melodic voice, "and there are clothes for you." Ryland was too exhausted to argue. He didn't even want to look at the food, but he knew he needed to stay strong if he was going to figure out how to escape. The servant placed a tray of strange-looking food in front of him, and Ryland reluctantly ate, though the flavors were unlike anything he had ever tasted. After eating, he lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced, the fear and confusion still gnawing at him. He was in the clutches of a powerful alien empire, forced to live with their princess. He had no idea why they had chosen him, or what would happen next. The thought of marriage, the queen's words, haunted him. Was there any way out of this? Could he ever escape this place? Or was he doomed to spend the rest of his life under their control? He didn't know, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to give up. He had always been resourceful, always found a way out of tight situations before. Maybe he could do it again. But this time, he had to be smart. There was no room for mistakes. The door opened again, and Vayara entered, her presence filling the room like a storm. She walked toward him without speaking, her golden eyes locked onto his every movement. "Get up," she said sharply. Ryland sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. What now? Vayara turned toward a large round mirror that seemed to glow with a strange energy. "You will train," she said. "I will teach you how to survive here." Ryland blinked. "Survive? I'm not interested in becoming your servant." Her eyes flashed with annoyance. "You will learn to fight, human. You will learn to survive in my world, or you will be nothing more than a plaything for my enemies." Her words were harsh, but they carried weight. Ryland knew she wasn't just threatening him. She was offering him a chance to prove himself. He didn't know why, but he felt as though she was testing him in ways he couldn't understand. "Fine," he said, standing up. "I'll train." Viara smiled. It wasn't kind, but there was something almost approving in it. "Good. We begin now." For the next few hours, she taught him the ways of her people, how to fight, how to think strategically, how to move in a world that wasn't his own. She was fierce, unrelenting, pushing him harder than he ever thought he could go. At first, he struggled to keep up, but as time passed, he started to understand her methods. He was no longer just some prisoner. He was becoming something else. Days turned into weeks, and Ryland found himself growing stronger, more capable, though still trapped in this alien world. He trained every day with Viara, learning new skills, techniques, and survival tactics. She was relentless, pushing him to his limits, but there was a part of him that began to respect her. He couldn't deny that she was powerful, and despite everything, he felt a strange pull toward her. Yet he still wasn't entirely sure what her game was. Was she truly trying to help him? Or was this all part of her plan to break him down, to make him submit to her will? "You wanted to see me?" Rylan asked, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. Viara turned toward him, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Yes, Rylan. There's something I need to show you." She walked over to the map and gestured to it. "This is the Xelarian Empire," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "It's vast, far bigger than anything you've ever known, and it's my responsibility to protect it, to lead it." Rylan moved closer, his eyes scanning the map. "What does this have to do with me?" Viara's gaze locked onto his. "You don't understand, do you? You're not just some human. You're the key to the future of this empire. I've seen something in you. Something that will help me take control. Something that will give us power." Ryland swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Her eyes flickered with an almost unreadable emotion. "I'm not just asking you to rule with me, Ryland. I'm asking you to help me change everything. To help me reshape this empire from the ground up. Together, we could control the entire galaxy." His mind was spinning. The idea of power was tempting, but it was also terrifying. He didn't want to be involved in her plans. He didn't want to rule anything, let alone an empire. "I can't do that," Ryland said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "I'm not a part of your world. I don't belong here." Viara stepped closer to him, her presence overwhelming. "You do belong here. You're not just some helpless prisoner, Ryland. I've chosen you for a reason. And together, we will become unstoppable." Her words hit him like a blow. There was something in her voice that was both seductive and dangerous. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't escape. Not now. Not when he was trapped in a world that he didn't understand, surrounded by forces he couldn't fight. "I won't be your partner in this," Ryland said, though his voice faltered. "I won't help you." Viara's eyes flashed with something. Anger, frustration, or maybe something more. She didn't speak for a long moment, and when she finally did, her voice was softer, almost regretful. "You don't have a choice," she said quietly. "You will help me, whether you want to or not. It's already too late to turn back." The weight of her words sank into Ryland's chest. He realized with a cold, sinking feeling that she was right. He was already too far gone. He was already a part of her world, a part of her plans. And there was no way out. But the question still lingered in his mind. Could he ever find a way to escape her grip? Could he ever truly break free of the Xelarian Empire and return to his life? Or was he, as she claimed, trapped in a destiny he couldn't escape? The answers were unclear, and for the first time since he arrived in this alien world, Ryland felt a real fear. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a pawn in a game much larger than he could have imagined. And as Viara's eyes locked onto his, he realized that his fight for freedom was just beginning. Ryland stood in the center of the Grand Room, Viara's words echoing in his mind. "You will help me, whether you want to or not." Those words lingered in the air like an unavoidable truth, heavy and suffocating. The idea of being forced into something he didn't want to do was infuriating. But what could he do? The walls of his prison were high. The path to freedom seemed impossibly far. And yet, despite the overwhelming feeling of hopelessness, a flicker of defiance still burned inside him. Vayara had a plan for him. And whether he liked it or not, it was becoming clear that he would be a part of it. But what was her plan? And why him? He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a politician. He was just a man from Earth, far from home, trapped in an alien world with no way out. So why was he the one she chose? As if sensing his thoughts, Vayara moved toward him. She stood close, but not too close, her presence impossible to ignore. Her golden eyes met his, and for a moment, Rylan saw something flicker in her gaze. It was almost like she was waiting for him to understand something beyond his grasp. "I know this isn't easy for you," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "But you need to understand, Rylan. This empire, my people, they need change. They need strength, and I can't do it alone." Rylan clenched his fists at his sides, trying to control his anger. "I don't care about your empire. I don't care about any of it. I just want to go home." "I do," Cade said with conviction. "We all make choices, but sometimes those choices are made for us. You didn't ask for this war. You didn't ask to lead an empire that would destroy everything we had. But the truth is, we all end up doing things we never imagined we would. The war, it changes you. But it doesn't have to define who you are." Lyra stared at him for a long time, as if she was seeing him for the first time. There was a look in her eyes, one that Cade couldn't quite place. It wasn't hope, but it was close, like a spark, something that could ignite if given the chance. It made Cade wonder if there was still a chance for them. A chance for them to find their way back to the people they once were. "I don't know if I can ever be that person again," Lyra said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I've done things, terrible things, and I can't erase that." "You don't have to erase it," Cade said, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't undo the past. No one can. But you can change what comes next. We all can. The future is still ours to shape." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of everything they had been through, the pain, the loss, the destruction, had lifted just enough to let in a glimmer of hope. Lyra's gaze dropped to the ground for a moment, as though she were trying to gather her thoughts. "I don't know how to make up for all the damage I've caused," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to make up for it all at once," Cade replied. "It's going to take time. We'll both have to find our way. But we can do it, together." Lyra looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his with a sense of clarity that hadn't been there before. For the first time in a long time, Cade saw something in her eyes, a spark of the girl she had once been. It wasn't the same, of course. The war had changed them both. But maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something new from the ashes. For a long while, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, side by side, letting the quiet settle around them. The sun was almost gone now, the sky darkening with the promise of night. But in the darkness, there was a sense of peace, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they could start over. "I don't know what happens next," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. "But I know I don't want to keep running from who I used to be, from who I still can be." Cade smiled, a small, hopeful smile. "That's a good start." As they sat there, the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky above them, Cade couldn't help but feel that, in some way, the past was reborn. Not in the way they had once imagined, but in a new way, one that could still hold hope. It wasn't perfect. There were no guarantees, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, that something was enough. The days that followed were full of uncertainty. Cade and Lyra spent their time together, talking in quiet corners of the camp, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The war had torn apart their world, leaving scars that would never heal. But there was something new between them now, something fragile, like a flicker of light in the darkness. They were trying to rebuild, to understand the broken pieces of their past, and what they might be able to do with what was left. However, the weight of their past decisions hung over them like a storm cloud. Cade had noticed it in Lyra, the way she would sometimes look lost in thought, as though she was searching for a way to make it all right. She had done terrible things, and though she had confessed her regrets to him, there was no easy way to undo the damage. He understood that now, understood that no matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't change everything she had been a part of. But Cade also saw something in her eyes that gave him hope. She wasn't just hiding from the consequences anymore. She was facing them, looking for a way to move forward, even if she didn't know how. But the world around them wasn't so forgiving. The human forces, victorious on the battlefield, were now turning their attention to the future. There were talks of rebuilding, of trying to make sense of the alien empire's collapse. But not everyone was ready to forgive. Not everyone believed in giving the aliens, especially someone like Lyra, a second chance. The generals, the soldiers, and even many civilians were still angry at the years of destruction, at the lives lost, at the betrayal. And for some, the idea of negotiating peace with the very person who had once been a princess leading their enemies felt impossible.